Welcome back to the Bionicle Inspiration series, where that same feeling you had when you cracked open a LEGO magazine, you found that Bionicle comic, and you poured through those pages, taking a look at where the Bionicle story is heading now, where that feeling of excitement, joy, and anticipation. What marks are going to be on? What are we going to talk about? What are you going to learn? Are you going to be inspired? Well, that's what the Bionicle Inspiration series is all about. We're going to take a look at, today, a bunch of mocks inspired by the Toa Mahri. These are a really awesome wave, probably even my favorite wave of Bionicle to some degree. I say that and I'm immediately like, well, the others were pretty cool too, though, now that I think about it. It's hard to decide favorites, man, but pretty awesome wave of Bionicle. And there's a, if you're planning on revamping one of these characters, hopefully this could help, but even still, maybe you're planning a few underwater vibes, or you're just thinking about revamping a mock, or we talk a little bit about different ways you could approach revamping something today, so let's dive on in. Yeah, I said dive on in an underwater-themed Toa wave. Let's dive on in. Let's journey into the pit, and hopefully there's no Baraki down there to interrupt our mission. The first mock we have today is by Bob the Doctor 27, and this is called Standardized Revamp Jala. So of course, Jala, one of the great members, and one of the great Toa. What a good Toa in this wave. He looked so cool. This is an awesome little revamp of him. So first off, I really like the more sort of unique, simplified, easy take on the blaster that came with the Toa Mahri. I don't know about you, but I found those a little bit difficult to fire sometimes. You really had to force that thing to go. So it's interesting, and also they were just large and a little cumbersome, so it's nice to see a more simplified, smaller version here, and also cool that it's sort of a more updated version, using some of the newer G2 blaster pieces, the stud shooters like that. A nice way of having a design that's very similar to the original, but it's different, and it's unique, and it's smaller, it's cool. It's a nice way of updating that. I really like that. So overall, the sort of smaller, slimmer design on this take on Jala, nothing wrong with doing that. Maybe you want to just build a sort of smaller, cuter version, or maybe not even cuter, just more of a slimmed down, refined version, You don't want it too large, you want it just a little smaller, and you want to really pack in lots of detail into that smaller space. That's an option you could take. But also, especially because this mock was called a standardized revamp, what does that mean? Well, it's kind of a little term that Bob the Doctor here has coined on this sort of standardized design that he's made. So he's actually made all the Toa Mahri with this sort of same rough kind of frame. And I really like that idea. Maybe you want to do that. Maybe you want to revamp an entire Toa team or make your own Toa team, but they all have the exact same format, whether that's just a simple general CCBS bone form, structure, frame design that you would get from a set, or a little custom frame that you've made that's in a similar vein to this. Nothing wrong with doing that, making a whole team just purely using that design and just finding the ways that you can, with each one, sort of spice it up a little bit, add a little bit to it, or even that. Maybe they're all exactly the same, but it's just fun to make the same thing multiple different ways and in different colors and stuff. Could be a fun thing to do, and I actually really like that. This is a cool concept here. I just like the fact that the arms on this are quite simple, just straight up CCBS. Really nice blend of Technic and Bionicle and CCBS in this mock here. Nice to see all of those being thrown together in a really nice unified fashion. But something I like is these lower legs here. They basically just use those three repeated orange pieces there in succession like that. And it works well. Those pieces are very helpful, honestly. So this is what they're called on Bricklink. We'll get a little screenshot in there. Boop! Technic, axle, and pin connector, perpendicular, double split. It's like a banana split, but not, it's more plasticky and gross. It's like the little display models they have at the ice cream shop where you're like, I want to eat that, and they're like, that's made of plastic, you can't eat that, but you eat it anyway because it looks really cool. Don't eat your Lego. I don't know where I was going with that analogy, but it's a really nice piece. And he's used them here on the legs. What was that analogy? I'm trying to move past it, but what did I just say? Anyway, great piece for making limbs, that part there. Works for the lower legs here. You could easily have done a very similar design on the upper legs as well. Works for upper and lower arms even. Great piece. You can use it in all sorts of different ways. You've probably seen a similar design being used in other episodes of Biss, and even on some of my mocks and other people's mocks, of course. So, great part. Great part indeed. If you're looking to invest in a few new pieces, grab a few of those. But anyway, really cool Jala revamp. Love what you've done. On to the next one. Which member of the Toa Mahri are we going to cover now? Well, this one is by M the Engineer, and it's called Liberators of the Deep, Kongu. So this is a part of a little fun collab between him and a whole bunch of other builders, and may or may not have another mock or two from that collab in here later on, so we'll talk more in the future. But, one, love a good collab, but two, Love this revamp of Kongu. Liberators of the Deep, Kongu. So Kongu was always more of the kind of stout, big, heavy-hitting kind of character, at least in the Mari. It was a little different in the Anika there, but I love that, he had these two big old guns, really, really cool look to him, and I love that this is kind of captured but altered slightly. I feel like to some degree they've still given him that sort of stout, slightly hunched look that the set had, but it almost looks like he's kind of got more refined, like, armor over the top now. The kind of black on top of the dark green there, to me, kind of looks a little like that. Maybe it's like a bulletproof vest, like you might see on a military man, or maybe he's more of a hunter. And kind of the general aesthetic of this mock looks very hunter-like. The idea that he's holding Alex's head like he's just decapitated the guy and beaten him. That's terrifying. But that's actually pretty cool as well. So I quite like that idea of, changing up the almost like Rambo look that the original Kongu had, and actually really rolling with that idea and expanding it more and seeing where you can take it. And I think kind of a lot of different elements like that, more refined like armor that, he has when he's hunting or fighting, the decapitated head, but even little elements like the tail at the back, kind of giving him a slightly more almost like savage look to some degree. Which you could kind of tie into a hunter, being a little bit more, savage and out to kill sort of thing. So giving him a tail, being a little less human, can kind of tie into that. It's interesting. Great way of advancing the ideas and playing with it a lot. I love that. I think that's the perfect thing to do in a revamp as well, is to really see how far you can stretch the original concept. Can you deviate it in an entirely different direction, but still kind of stay true to that? It's cool. I like that. Or even don't stay true to the original design. Deviate in an entirely new way and maybe come up with a really original, different take on a character. It's a great idea. So yeah, this is a really awesome revamp here. I like that the gun there is also a little similar to the one we saw before, but different. So always multiple ways of making something there. That's cool to see. Nice work, M. On to the next one. This is by Sam I Am, and this is called Super Hooky, which, as the time of this recording, Mock Pages is down. What a surprise. And I only have one image of this mock because I can't actually access it on Mock Pages, but through the power of Google, I was able to get an image here. So hopefully by the time you check the links in the description, you'll be able to jump on over to Mock Pages and see more images of this. But for now, we've only got one. So what I love about this revamp is that it's a revamp, but it kind of, and don't at me, maybe there is a few pieces from Hooky actually in this, but for the most part, it's a Hooky revamp using no Hooky pieces. Different mask. Okay, maybe those shoulder blades were actually what was on Hooky, but it's very inspired by the general look that Hooky Mari had, but taking it in an entirely different direction. I love that there's little subtle nods of the sort of spikier shoulder, but it's kind of flipped in some way, and it's still there, but it's a little less prominent. A little kind of ties in with a few other elements this time. The mask, the Mystica Onawa mask here has very similar notes to the Hooky mask, how they both had that sort of like slight axe look to their cheekbones there. So it's little subtle overtones there that kind of remind you of that mask, but instead you're using a different mask, and I like that. Finding a way of doing that. Maybe you don't have Hooky Mari's mask, but you love the character. Well, maybe you have this mask, or a mask that looks a little similar in your eyes, or has similar design elements to it, and could actually work just as well. Also like to the new weapons here, giving him a good old Zamisphere launcher, just like the Anika version would have had. That's awesome to see. And it's also awesome to see this really, really cool like axe design here, using some Knights Kingdom axe pieces and a few other things thrown in there. Looks great, really fits the character well. This is a really nice way of making the character much larger, honoring the original, but changing it up a bit. And it's actually a really cool idea, the idea of revamping something, but giving yourself the limitation or the challenge of you can't actually use any pieces that came in the set. Or maybe use a couple here and there, but, it's an interesting idea. Something you could try, of course, if you're planning a revamp. Whether that's a revamp of a pre-existing set, or just, you're revamping an original character that you yourself have made. Something to think about. So a really nice take on Hooky. On to the next one. This is by Patrick Biggs and is called Hully Murray. So this mock sort of has a very subtle dress design here, using some piston pieces. It kind of reminds me almost of maybe like a little bit of like a hula skirt or something, which, you could argue kind of ties in a little bit with some of the original roots and inspiration for Bionicle as a theme, as a concept. So I kind of like those little subtle tones. I also like the idea that it could well just be, weapons hanging on a belt, but it has sort of slight, like feminine tones to it. It's interesting. It's a creative way of doing a dress, but it not being too over the top. And a clever use of the pieces as well. What I really like about this mock is it's very similar to what we saw with Hooky before. It's taking the general look of the character. You know, Harley had a very distinct mask, these big flowing wings, and you know, taking that but using different pieces, changing up the color scheme, changing a few things on this, and you can still, for the most part, tell that this is Harley, but it's very different from the original set. So I like that. Another thing I like too is that this mock has no lime in it, because I'm sure anybody who bought Harley Mari knows the pain of those lime socket pieces which constantly broke. So if you are planning a Harley revamp, be careful with those lime joints, my friends, and maybe you want to change up the color there, because it's just going to be problematic. Or maybe you're like that outlier who bought Harley Mari and those lime joints never broke, and you're like, what are you talking about? And you're the prodigal son. You know how you've watched movies all the time and you're like, man, one day some cool wise guy's going to come up to me and say, you're the chosen one. You're like, oh, I knew it. I knew I was the chosen one. I'm telling you now, if your Harley Mari joints never broke, you are the chosen one. It's true. I know. I don't know why I've waited this long to tell you, but you are, because no one else has had that. You must be a God-given gift in this world. You are the chosen one. Anyway, I love too that this mask uses a subtle flex with the misprinted Harley Cow mask here. Of course, it should be a much darker color, and it's a much lighter color here. A nice way of tying that into the medium blue being juxtapositioned against the dark blue here on this mock really helps to kind of tie it together nicely. I also like the kind of mind games that has. Mind games is definitely the wrong word, but the fact that when you think of a cow, you typically think of it as that sort of darker trans blue, but because this is the misprinted one, which is a lighter blue, you kind of still have that in your head to some degree. So it actually kind of ties the medium blue and the dark blue together, kind of because you're thinking that it should be that color at the same time. Maybe that's just me, but hey, if you do have a misprinted mask, that could be an interesting way to play with it, introducing that color in there somehow, as long as it fits with the colors that are also on the mock. Kind of those little interesting mind games there. Maybe, I don't know. You could be listening right now and being like, I don't really think that's what's happening, Ben. And maybe you're right. Maybe this is a bit of a stretch. Regardless, though, that translucent cow does tie very nicely with the medium blue. I also like the fact that he's changed up the weapon here and given her not claws, but this sort of longer kind of spear, sort of, not really a trident, doesn't really have the 3 prongs on the end, but yeah, more of a sort of spear staff kind of look. Very fitting for the character, I think. It works really well. So yeah, this is a really fantastic revamp of Harley. It's a fantastic job. 10 years old this mock is, 2010. Wow. There you go. Gorast wings also work really well here. It's a nice addition. Anyway, next one. This is by Mittens, and it's called Liberators of the Deep Matoro. So here's another one from that Liberators of the Deep collab. This is a really nice take on Matoro. I like the fact that there are subtle elements of him looking a little angelic, because of course in the Bionicle storyline, rip my buddy Matoro, he sacrificed himself for the greater good, and obviously passed on through doing that. That's how a sacrifice works. And there's sort of kind of like a wing design, or maybe it's more of like an interesting kind of just, it's not really the shoulders, it is probably more of a wing design, or maybe like some underwater jets or something. It's kind of has a little bit of subtle bits of looking like angel wings to some degree, at least in my opinion, so I kind of like that. As I like the weapon change on this, which has sort of subtle notes to what he had before with his kind of claw design, but also looks a little bit different and new and updated, and that's nice. So like the little streaks of red here, that's a nice little addition, introducing another additional color onto one of these characters. It's something you could easily try yourself, and looks really nice. And it's great too that he's able to have used those Baraki weapon pieces there that had that kind of white and red marble texture to them, and then kind of integrating that into the leg design so it doesn't really look like he has feet, and that it's more this sort of hovering design, which, the character's underwater, kind of makes sense that they'd actually change their feet to being more like propellers or jets or something, so that they can kind of just propel faster in the water, which I don't know how Bionicle lore worked in that sense. Could you just take your feet off and put jets on the end? Is it like, would that be like in our world the equivalent of just you cut off your leg and shove some mechanical details on there and nothing would happen? Or because they're biomechanical beings, could that work? We're asking the real questions here today. But regardless, I like this idea, and it looks really nice and makes a lot of sense within the pre-existing lore as well. That's always something to consider too with a revamp, Do you want it to make sense in the universe? And, if you're a bit more of an aficionado with the storyline, maybe you really factor in some of those given circumstances there, Where are they? What are they doing? So how will their armor, body, or any sort of upgrades represent or reflect that? Or does it not relate at all? Because it doesn't have to. But something to think about at least when you're revamping here. So yeah, this is a really, really nice Matora revamp here. Mittens, great to see some awesome stuff from you. But you always make awesome stuff. On to the next one. This is a mock by _double. No, the _double. And it's called Liberators of Mari Nui Nuparu. So this is also a part of that Liberators of the Deep collab, except this time he called it Liberators of Mari Nui, so maybe that was a typo, or maybe I'm missing something. I'm gonna blame it on me, why not? Anyway, a different take on Nuparu, and again, nice to see a new colour being introduced here, this time being orange. Works quite well, you know? I remember as a kid, I always thought Nuparu was a little more of a bland toy, you know? He just had a shield, he didn't have a weapon, and I hadn't even thought about how cool Captain America is, and he's like that. But for me, as a kid, I felt that was lacking. Now, as an adult, I'm like, Nuparu was awesome. He just had a shield. He could bash people with that, protect himself. The possibilities are endless. But I like the fact that he has changed that up a little bit. You know, as cool as the shield was, could you give this character some weapons instead this time? What would that look like? Well, here's a revamp exploring that, and that's cool. One thing I do like about these weapons too, specifically, is that one of these weapons is very similar to Mantax's weapon, the Black Baraki character. He had a very similar weapon to that sort of little two-claw design that's in one of his hands there. I kind of like that idea. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Kongu before, how he had the decapitated head of Elec. Maybe Nuparu was in a fight with good old Mantax there, and he either stole his weapon in combat, you know, maybe Mantax dropped it, and he decided, no, I'm going to use this just to spite him, or he has actually killed Mantax and said, I'm going to take his weapon as a trophy. Kind of like that idea. It's just an interesting concept, and you know, maybe a character you're building has taken the weapon of another character. It's an interesting idea, and so I like that on this mock here. It's pretty cool. Just like the shoulder design on this Nuparu revamp here, some nice stuff going on for sure. So always nice to see a few revamps here, and you might think that's it, but we got a little bonus one here today. This is another Nuparu mock here. It's called Nuparu, the Greatest Engineer, and it is by Toa Radix. He's got a little quote here, which I assume is an official quote and not one that Toa Radix has made up here, but it's a fun quote. It says, I know a way. It involves explosions. Lots of explosions. That's cool. I like that. Anyway, something else I like is a cute little Matoran design here, and a very posable one too, of course. Yeah, you can see him in a few different poses here, and looking very, very different from the sort of traditional Mictoran design, which wasn't overtly posable. It's interesting to see that kind of being played around with here on this character. It looks awesome. And certainly something that I think is always important to remember is, you know, if you are revamping one of the Toa Mahri, don't forget about the Anika, don't forget about the fact that they were originally Matoran as well. Maybe when you revamp them, you want to throw in a few elements that reflect back to some of their other forms, or you don't actually want to make them in their Mahri form, you want to make them in their Anika form instead. Remember some little things like that. And remember that that's, of course, another possibility you can consider as well. Yeah, a great little fun Matoran design here. Nothing wrong with just building a cute little small guy like this with some of your pieces. Taking a few pictures and bam, you got a mock, and it didn't take too much. Pretty cool. So that's been some Toa Mahri revamps here today on this episode of the Bionicle Inspiration Series. Hopefully we've got some of those creative juices flowing, and hey, if you're planning on revamping a Toa Mahri or any Toa in general, hopefully some of the stuff we discussed today can help you with that. Speaking of helping out, if you want to submit some of your mocks to the show, you of course can. You can do so through the email you're currently seeing on your screen. That email is also in the description, so if you want to copy and paste that into your email, that's where you can do so. Additionally, in the description are some links to the mocks you saw in today's episodes. Be sure, like I said, to hop on over to those links and peruse around, maybe find a few more images, and also check out some of the other stuff these guys have done, because there's some talented people. Additionally, if you want to leave your thoughts on this episode, you can no longer do so in the comments because of the Copa law changes, which is a big misfortune, of course, but luckily there are other ways you can let me know your thoughts on this episode if you have them. That's over on the Discord server, my Instagram, Facebook, Flickr. Send me a message on any of that sort of stuff, or leave a comment on any of the other content that I've got over there, and by all means, let me know what you thought about this episode. And while you're there, be sure to join the Discord server, take a look at some of the other content on all of my social media and stuff. There's all sorts of things going on there, and I'm sure you'll enjoy checking them out. Next week, we got episode 150. That's going to be exciting. That'll be a fan-submitted mocks episode, and I might have a few other additional changes in that episode. You might have to just wait and see what that is. Oh, that's exciting, isn't it? Hopefully you enjoyed. We'll see you in the next one. Bye for now, guys.